Hi, I'm Bob Ethington.
And I'm Nick Nicholas.
And this is From Akron and Beyond. Well, folks, our show today is going to be kind of another in our special little series of getting to know Bob and Nick.
Get to know the nerds, record nerds.
Who are we to dare utter our opinions about local music and other things? Well, we thought that today's show it might be kind of fun for each of us to put together our own all-time top 10 albums list, sort of a desert island list, if you will. And I have to say, and I'll probably be interjecting comments along this theme throughout this entire process, this was very difficult. Now, a lot of you out there probably remember the book High Fidelity by Nick Hornby, and of course the movie with John Cusack, the ever cute John Cusack. And one of the things in that movie or in that book is that the guy who owns a record store loves putting together lists. He's always putting together a list of best guitarist, best this, best soul song for love making, whatever, all these crazy lists that he does. And I have to admit, I've always been kind of a list maker myself. But you know, Nick, I think I might be getting out of the list making game after this. This was rough.
It's difficult, man.
Yes,
really...
I'm not happy with my list. I like the first few, like top ones. I can probably live with. But almost all the other ones, well, I'm happy with them, but I feel like they're exchangeable.
Yeah, but also, first of all, I'm going to say this is actually going to be like a little reveal show. Bob and I, we had a couple rules. No greatest hits,
right,
and no jazz. Just because, only because, we want to narrow it down to something. Keep it. To where a lot of our listeners are familiar, comfortable with. Yeah,
it was just we're doing 10 albums, and I started thinking Miles Davis and John Coltrane, and next thing I know, it's like my list is completely going crazy. I mean, I was like, well, wait a minute, I can't include all this stuff. Classical music and country music and stuff. I mean, I could come up with lists on all that stuff. So no live albums either.
Oh, that's right.
Yes,
no. What I meant by reveal was Bob and I just talked about those couple guidelines, but neither one knows what the other has put down. So it's going to be a reveal to both of us.
Right, exactly.
And, first of all, what's difficult about this was there's so many bands that I grew up with and I love, and I've got complete collections. Like I've got, I think, all the Kinks, everything by Elvis Costello, Robin Hitchcock, Sonic Youth, and Tom Waits. But as a whole, I love them, and I listen to them and love them just as much as I did, 20, 30 years ago when I first started, when I discovered them. But so in saying, none of them are on my top 10 list because I love their albums, their entirety of their work so much.
I'm glad to hear you say that because that's very similar to what I was going through. In fact, even a couple of the same people you mentioned there, like Elvis Costello, for instance. I had the same thing. I mean, as you know, Nick, my favorite current band is Guided by Voices.
Yeah.
But Guided by Voices has like 150 albums, and it's like, what one do you pick? It's just impossible. And then on the other hand, another band that I love is Pavement. But to me, Pavement made 5 albums, and they're all great. I can't pick just one, really. So it is a similar thing. And then there's, I actually jotted down people that aren't on my list, and I'm like, this is going to embarrass me later. But I'm happy with my list. I mean, the 10 that are on here, I stand by as being all truly great albums and albums that I love and still play.
Yeah, what's really cool, too,
regularity.
The ones that I mentioned, except for Tom Waits and Sonic Youth and the Kinks, I mean, everything that Elvis Costello and Robin Hitchcock released to this day is still,
excellent.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Right. So I think we should begin. We'll begin with you, Nick. You get to start us off here. So let's start with number 10.
Yeah.
We'll be dramatic here. We'll move up to the number 1.
Sure, this is sort of an obscure band, but Pearls Before Swine, who was led by Tom Rapp.
Okay.
I guess you could describe them as psychedelic folk rock.
Mm-hmm.
And they came up, in a 65, 66 on an obscure underground label called ESP Disc.
Yeah.
They released everything from the Fugs to Charles Manson to really great jazz.
There were Sun Ra albums on there.
Yeah. And, the first album was One Nation Underground, and the second was Balaclava. They featured, great album covers like one of the first one was
a Kibosh cover.
Yeah, Garden of Earthly Delights.
Yeah.
And then Balaclava, the Battle of Balaclava. It even had a recording of Florence Nightingale on there,
Very arty.
Yeah. But anyway, one of their albums, a later album, was called The Use of Ashes. And it's got, it's just a great album. And one song, Rocket Man, was inspired. Who's the lyricist for Elton John? Bernie Taupin.
Bernie Taupin.
Yeah. He that inspired him to write the commercial, Rocket Man that Elton John did.
Yeah.
Had nothing to do with it, but this is a good topic, And another song called The Jeweler. And
I love that song.
But you know them too, right?
Yes, yeah. Okay, now Nick, you're cheating already. What one album for this is going to be?
No,
on your list?
I said The Use of Ashes.
That's your one. That's your favorite. Okay,
yeah, The Use of Ashes. I mentioned the other two because that's how I discovered them.
All right, I get it. Okay, I will allow that. I don't know how I got into Pearls Before Swine. I think that they were on one of those. Boy, you have to be old to remember these, but Warner Brothers used to have these sampler albums.
Yeah, I've got one.
The Big Ball was one that was like $2 for a double album. And then my favorite one was Looney Tunes, which was $3 for a triple album, came in a box set. And those records were great because they were sampler albums of all their new records. Yeah. And you got to... they exposed me to all kinds of different stuff, and The Jeweler was on one of those albums.
I got to meet Tom Rapp. He Pearls Before Swine played the old Smiling Dog Saloon twice.
Okay,
and in those days you could actually talk to musicians. You were right there, and a great conversation with them. And then towards the end, one of his last shows, he did a solo acoustic set. He opened for Patti Smith at the old Agora, which the night that famous recording of the Who, My Generation, was made, where John Cal comes out and does the bass part. Anyway, that Tom Rapp after that became, he got out of music and became a civil rights attorney.
Okay, yeah. I think he's truly one of those. Speaking of One Nation Underground, he's one of those people that remains kind of underground, but has a lot of respect from people who know his stuff. Wouldn't you agree?
Yeah. And their first few albums had, these great covers, but no pictures of the band. And one of the Tom Rapp's lines was, the hunchback with a lisp. And we were thinking, man, what are these mutants? These deformed, intellectual hippies.
The jeweler has a shop on the corner of the
All right, my number 10 is, this was a hard one. They were all hard, but my number 10 is an album called Unhalf Bricking by Fairport Convention. Now, Fairport Convention is one of my favorite bands. They, of course, featured the great guitarist Richard Thompson, who has gone on to a stellar solo career, and the beautiful singing of Sandy Denny, who's one of my all-time favorite singers. And it was kind of a hard call. Like their first 5 or 6 albums are all terrific. And I think the go-to for a lot of people would be an album called Liege and Leaf, which is kind of considered to be one of the ultimate British folk rock albums, and it is a fantastic album. But I'm giving the nod to Unhalf Bricking because of two songs. One is a long tune, about 11 minutes long, called A Sailor's Life, that really features Thompson on guitar, and to my ears was kind of the song that suddenly people were like, wow, this guy is a great guitar player, because it has a kind of a long jam to it, and it's a very powerful tune. And then Who Knows Where the Time Goes, the beautiful ballad
song
that Sandy Denny wrote, and of course became a hit later for, I think, Judy Collins.
Yep.
But the Sandy Denny version with Fairport is definitive, I think. And so it's just a beautiful album. They also do a couple of Bob Dylan covers on there, which is, of course, I'm a sucker for. But it's a great album. So Unhalf Bricking by Fairport Convention is my number 10.
It's interesting that I thought they were too light for me back in those days, my rock and roll days. And a couple years ago, I started, buying some of their including those two albums you mentioned at Scott's, at Time Traveler.
Okay.
And I really appreciate, I missed them back then.
Yeah. They are. Their music really holds up. Yeah. The production of those albums and stuff is kind of timeless. Yeah. So give us number 9, Nick.
One of my favorite bands, Love, and even though my favorite album is Forever Changes, but two of their earlier albums, Love and Da Capo, had these great songs. The first one featured a cover of Burt Bacharach tune called "My Little Red Book," and Da Capo featured 7 and 7 Is. So they're pretty, hard folk rock, if you want to try to categorize it. But their third album, Forever Changes, it just all came together. I mean, God, 40 years ago, people were putting him in the 100 best albums, lists. And it's a lot lighter than the first two albums and the fourth and fifth. But, man, it's just all came together. The Arthur Lee, who the leader of Love, his singing and his it's just it's like a dream.
Yeah, that is that's one of those sui generis albums, right? It's one of a kind.
Yeah, there's nothing like it.
There's nothing else that really sounds like it. It's often grouped in with albums like Pet Sounds, and albums like that just have just like its own sound. Even all the titles on it are odd.
Alone Again
or right. Yeah, I mean,
The Daily Planet.
Yeah, but they're great, and they're melodic, and it's a beautiful record. No doubt.
One thing, I don't know if I should mention this or not, but it was a tragic band. I mean, there were great musicians, but drugs and petty crime and major crime, and just they were in a studio doing one of the best albums to that point had ever been created, and they were falling apart, and you wouldn't know it from the finished product.
Right, exactly. That's very true. Yeah. Arthur Lee was kind of one of those casualties.
He was in prison for trying to kill somebody, or at least his version wasn't that, but
right. He's framed. All right, my number 9 is an album that will be very familiar to most people. It's by the Rolling Stones. It's called Let It Bleed. With the Stones, it's hard to pick one album that's a favorite. I guess that's one of those bands that could have come under that rubric of, gee, they have so much great stuff. How would you name just one? But those albums came out at such a key time in rock history that they all kind of a historic sort of weight to them, I think. I think most people will sit there. Will sit there. Most people will say that. What's the best Stones album? And the usual picks are usually like Aftermath, Beggar's Banquet, Exile on Main Street, Sticky Fingers, right? Those are the common ones to go to. And you probably could name any one of them. I could probably live with any one of those. But I have to admit, Let It Bleed is my favorite. It starts off with Gimme Shelter. Now, Gimme Shelter is a song that everyone has heard 1,000 times, and yet still, every time that guitar part begins at the beginning of that song, you get chills. Yeah. I mean, as overplayed as it is. Yeah. And that's another thing about that album is it has several...
Just a kiss away.
It has, right. And it has several, you can't always get what you want. That's another song that people have heard a million times. Still sounds great, though. And then it also has a couple songs like Monkey Man and Live With Me that are like great songs that you don't hear that often. You Got the Silver with Keith Richards on vocals. That's a great song. And so, no, that's not on that album. And so Nick was trying to help, but that's on Beggar's
Should be on.
But anyway, so I am happy with Let It Bleed on my list by the Rolling Stones. A great album.
Bob, you're going to have to help me with this one because I don't know if it's on your list or not, but how the hell could you expound or talk about Marquee Moon by Television?
Okay.
I mean, that I never, we're listening to the Ramones, Patti Smith, Richard Hell, and along comes Marquee Moon. They just changed things. I mean, it legitimized what everybody thought was, a scene that was. I mean, the Talking Heads were there too, but Marquee Moon is a class of its own.
Yeah, well, it's not on my list. It could obviously easily have been.
Hey.
But I gave it to you, Nick, except I didn't know you were going to have it. Well, I think this has come up before, but a thing about the whole New York punk scene is that when you hear about the bands that were at CBGB's, none of them were really punk, except maybe the Ramones.
That's it.
There was Blondie, Television,
Richard Hell,
Talking Heads, and the Voidoids. Yes,
two.
So there's two, but the other bands were varied, and Television,
like the Akron scene.
Yeah, well, exactly. Yes, but Television was like the epitome of that because. In a lot of ways, they were kind of an old-fashioned band. They had long guitar solos, and I remember playing that album when I first heard it, and it almost kind of reminded me of Neil Young a little bit. It was just kind of had that feel to it. But again, that's one of those albums that is sort of one of a kind. The songs on it are great. The lyrics are great. The playing is great. There's just some amazing guitar work on it. All the musicians
came together.
On the It's amazing.
Just like Forever Changes, it just came together as a perfect album.
Yeah, Billy Fica's drumming is great, and it's one of those things that kind of it's funny because Television's such a legendary band. Their reputation's based really on that album.
Yeah.
I mean, the second album, Adventure, eventually came around to enjoy it, but it paled compared to Marquee Moon.
Yeah.
It just because that album was so amazingly great. Yeah. And then I think they made a couple albums over the years.
Yeah, but they're nothing like
reformed the band, that kind of thing. But which were good. But obviously Marquee Moon is what their reputation is based on.
Even Tom Verlaine's solo albums and Richard Lloyd's solo albums are nice, but they nothing like Marquee Moon.
Yeah, right, exactly. So. This is From Akron and Beyond. I'm Bob Ethington here with Nick Nicholas, and we are comparing our respective top 10 all-time albums list. So far, no actual fisticuffs have broken out, so that's a good sign. But we have plenty to go, so who knows where this is going to end up. I do want to go on another one of my side caveats about these lists, because one thing that hurt my list with this was that I love blues music. Like, I was going to put a Howlin' Wolf album on my list. But the problem is there are Howlin' Wolf albums, but they came out way later, and they were usually not that great. The Howlin' Wolf stuff that's fantastic were singles that were on the Chess label, and I couldn't, in good conscience, count them because they were not really albums. You know,
I understand.
Elvis the Sun Sessions is not really an album. It's epic, historically important, fantastic music. But the Sun Sessions was never an album. That's just a bunch of these singles that he put out when he recorded for Sun.
Yeah, when it came, you didn't have to worry about me. When it came to blues, I remember it was either Frank Zappa or Alice Cooper had said, "How many times can you lose your baby?" I mean, so
Nick. All right. On that note, I'm going a resolutely un-blues album. My number 8 album is Kid A by Radiohead. Radiohead, I think, and I'm not alone, is one of the most important bands of the last 25 years. Talk about great musicianship. These guys are geniuses. Tom York and Johnny Greenwood in particular are amazing. And they were kind of seen as being the saviors of rock and roll music as the late 90s heading into the 2000s was happening. Their album OK Computer seemed like it was kind of like, you know, on the cutting edge of what rock and roll music could be, guitar-based rock. And then they threw a loop on everybody in 2000 and made Kid A, which is essentially an electronica album. There's very little guitar on it, and what there is just done for sort of textural purposes. It's just part of an overall sound that's very synthesized and loop-based, with Tom York's anguished and beautiful vocals hanging over that. The album is eerie. There's a whole book that came out on it a year ago or so about how it kind of, I mean, there's all these odd, I mean, it's just a coincidence, obviously, but there's all these odd lyrical lines that almost seem like they're predicting 9/11 and stuff. It's kind of like, I mean, it's like the, you know, I'm not trying to make this mystic. I'm just trying to say that the album is so of its time and our time. It still holds up. If you play it today, it sounds absolutely contemporary.
It's a good record.
And you know, because it's just this sort of foreboding to it that I think a lot of people feel, you know, with politics and the environment and all the other stuff that we all know about. So anyway, yeah, Radiohead's Kid A is my number 8.
I'm going to go back like 40-something years, probably almost 50 years.
Number 7.
Yeah, the Velvet Underground and Nico. Supposedly produced by Andy Warhol, but he just lent his name to it.
Yeah.
And
his artwork.
Yeah, yeah. his cred.
Yeah.
Yeah. But, you know, I mean, that, you know, the quote that I think we repeated, you know, once before on our show about, I think Brian Eno said that it didn't sell many records, but everyone who bought it formed a band.
Right.
And it was just such an inspiration to so many of us, you know. Mm-hmm. And, you know, Lou Reed's lyrics, John Cal's electric viola, Nico's, you know, mystic drone.
Yeah,
you know,
vocals, yeah.
It was just. I mean, there was nothing like it. You know, I remember. I mean, the cover even. You know, he had a banana that you had to peel, and I never peeled mine, so it goes for at least $1,000 on eBay now. You know, unpeeled banana.
Keep it that way.
Yeah. But anyway, what was in that? I mean, you know, it was a little decadence stuff that you know, white kid, you know, growing up in. You know, in Akron, Ohio, it was like, you know, mind opening, you know?
Yeah, like another planet kind of stuff.
Yeah. But anyway, that just opened a lot of doors for me and a lot of my friends.
No Velvet's album made my list. And I think that was a perfect example of what we were talking about the records almost negating themselves, because I sort of view the 4 Velvet Undergrounds as a whole, as a piece. And the thing that always amazes me about those 4 albums is that they're each totally different.
Absolutely.
And yet each one of them inspired a whole genre of bands.
Yeah.
There are bands that sound like White Light, White Heat, and there's a lot of bands that sound like the 3rd album.
Yeah.
That kind of mellow stuff that they did on that one.
I remember I went to see the Velvet Underground at the Smiling Dog right after Lou Reed quit. You know, it was a big surprise, you know. And I went with some college friends, you know, this was probably in 70, 71. And they thought they sounded like Creedence. So, I mean, that's another, you know, the loaded version.
Yeah, well, there's that 5th album that was called Squeeze.
Yeah, which I played it once.
Nobody counts that as a Velvet's album.
King Kong squeezing the Empire State Building on the cover.
My number 7 is one that I could not put on my list because I loved it so much as a kid when it came out, and I still love it. And that's Frank Zappa's Hot Rats.
Yeah, that's good.
That album is, of course, primarily instrumental, and I had never heard anything like it when it came out. The songs, the arrangements are so inventive on it, and it was, boy, what a great production on that record, too. It still sounds terrific. And it also features some great Zappa guitar work. It's funny because everyone has an opinion. Anyone that knows anything about Frank Zappa has an opinion. Often very strong in favor, often very strong against, right? I think he's a very divisive musician.
The new documentary is actually pretty cool.
Oh, it's very interesting, yeah. But I think he's underrated as a guitarist. His guitar playing is amazing, and it sounds like nobody else.
Yeah, but I think he's mentioned quite a bit as a guitar. You know,
maybe increasingly.
Yeah.
But I don't think he's up
more
with those. Yeah, the typical guitar gods or whatever. But he did so much other stuff. He was, such an amazing composer and arranger and what have you. So. Anyway, Hot Rats by Frank Zappa is my number 7, which brings us to Nick's number 6.
And back to the old days, Patti Smith's Horses.
Okay.
That's another one and it was produced by John Cale, from the Velvet Underground.
Right.
And, the poetry and just the in-your-face, I'm here, I got something to say, her poetry, and her, once again, it's something I never heard of.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
It was a real powerful album, and I got to. Luckily, she played in this area around that time. I'd say 4 or 5 times. I got to see her, and every show was as powerful as the records.
She was a very dynamic female performer as well. She was unusual for that time, I think. Don't you?
Yeah,
because she was so aggressive. Yeah. My number 6 is Hunky Dory by David Bowie.
Oh.
And
God, what I missed that one.
And to this day, it's still, and I know there's Ziggy Stardust out there, and I know there's Low and Heroes and all kinds of great albums by a guy that easily could have come under that rubric if he made so much good stuff. How do you pick one?
Yeah, I forgot.
But
that.
I can pick Hunky Dory because I think that album still is so unique, and the songs on it are so great. And oddly enough, weirdly enough, I heard that album before Ziggy.
Me too.
Did you?
Yeah.
Okay, interesting. Because most people didn't get into Bowie till Ziggy Stardust. But, and you know, obviously there's some songs that everyone knows off of Hunky Dory, like Changes comes to mind, and Life on Mars, which is a fantastic song. A song I would throw out there is Quicksand, which I think has some of his greatest lyrics, and his vocal on it is just so terrific. So, yes, David Bowie's Hunky Dory, my number 6.
Yeah, Jennifer and I, that's one of our favorite albums, and I can't believe I missed that one on our list. But
well, no. I covered you there, Nick.
Yeah, thank you. Well, this other one is,
we're to number 5, right?
Huh?
We're down to number 5, so we're getting to the really great stuff. This would be your for number 5.
Well, I didn't do it in that order. I just did my top 10. I didn't.
You didn't order them in order?
And I didn't. No, I didn't put them in. No, they're all equally important to me.
Oh, okay.
Yeah. I didn't do it.
That's one way to do it, I guess.
Yeah.
All right, Nick.
Well,
number 5. Although it could be number 10.
Yeah,
number
it could
2.
be anything. The way I do things, it could be. Anyways, as a young kid, me and my buddy Terry Walker, who later on we were in the Bizarros together, would go into a couple Akron stores that had cutout bins. Well, it was before cutout bins. There were DJ copies. So the DJs in Akron that catered certain genres on their stations didn't know what these crazy, rock albums were, and that's how we discovered, Frank, the Mothers of Invention, the first Mothers album, and some bad stuff, crazy stuff. But also, I picked an album by a group called Caravan, and it was their first. And Caravan was, they were from Canterbury, part of England. Richard Coughlin, Pye Hastings, David Sinclair, and Richard Sinclair. And the Canterbury scene was pretty experimental. There was a band called Wildflowers that featured Robert Wyatt, Kevin Ayers, who I've got almost all of his records, and he later on went into the Soft Machine. And Caravan had one album that sort of sold more than the others, called In the Land of Gray and Pink. But the first album was just one that changed things. And the keyboards on it were really intense, and it really inspired my buddy Terry to, when we were in the Bizarros, to a lot of his keyboard, creations were influenced by Caravan.
The Canterbury bands are something that I would recommend adventurous music listeners seek out, because they're all sort of, I guess you would say, progressive rock, but they're not like they're not like Yes or Emerson, Lake and Palmer or something like that. They're very melodic. They're very song oriented, but the playing is incredibly inventive, and
intricate.
And so like you named them. Soft Machine would be another one to include in there. But that's an interesting choice. The first Caravan album.
Yeah.
All right.